Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm Kaveh Tatwe. U.S. President Barack Obama has announced a host of measures to strengthen oversight and transparency of the controversial surveillance program, aiming to ease public concerns and uneasiness. Is his promise sincere? Experts have said his promises would not include structural changes to the program. Well, in this debate, we're going to ask our experts the same, and additionally, dig deeper into U.S.'s vast surveillance empire.
Weeks after the revelation of a mass U.S. spying program both inside the country and abroad, the U.S. president is trying to address the public's concerns. Speaking at a White House press conference, Obama admitted that his government's controversial surveillance activities, which involve the daily collection of millions of phone calls and emails, have depleted public trust.
It is absolutely true that with the expansion of technology, this is an area that's moving very quickly. With the revelations that have depleted public trust, that if there are some additional things that we can do to build trust back up, then we should do them.
To restore this trust, Obama says he will bring more oversight and transparency into U.S. spying activities in the wake of the revelations made by former NSA contractor Edward Snowden in June.
There's no doubt that Mr. Snowden's leaks triggered a much more rapid and passionate response than would have been the case if I had simply appointed this review board to go through and I'd sat down with Congress and we had worked this thing through.
Yet at the same time, Obama has made it clear that Washington has no intention of ending its spying programs. The U.S. government claims it only collects data on individuals when investigating suspected terrorists. But the facts on the ground show otherwise. The case of a Texas teen who posted a sarcastic comment on Facebook while playing an online video game is just one example. Justin Carter is facing a felony charge for his inappropriate online joke and could face 8 years in prison. He has now been released on bail. And so while Obama claims his administration has no interest in snooping on ordinary citizens, it seems the U.S. government will continue to analyze the communication patterns of everyone.
That's the key word, everyone. Let's find out if our guests agree or disagree. Former American intelligence linguist Scott Rickard joins us from Florida. We have American author and commentator Carol Gould joining us from London. I'd like to welcome both of our guests. Let me first start with you, Scott Rickard. How much of a hit has the Obama administration taken over this surveillance or spying program, and why is Obama worried?
Well, I wouldn't call it much of a hit. These kinds of revelations have been coming out for many years. I remember when I first started to discover these types of things in the early 80s, and I was working at the NSA. So James Bamford's book came out in 1983, and it was a book that we all found very interesting because we found out things that we didn't even know ourselves as we worked there, and they turned out to be absolutely true. That being said, whether or not he's taking a hit, I think that he's being extremely disingenuous with the American people. To say the fact that he was, he was going to put together some form of oversight before the Snowden incident is just complete. It's completely disingenuous. I mean, they would have never been a review board, and thankful for reporters like Glenn Greenwald, and he has good access to mainstream media. He's one of the few outspoken journalists that does continue to have good access to both BBC and American media. So no, Obama didn't really take a hit. This guy's been basically ducking and dodging the truth and misleading the American people for some time now.
Obama called for the start of a debate in the court that authorizes surveillance. Now, it appears that this court only receives requests from the government without hearing any counter-arguments, which, from what I understand now, is customary in virtually all of the U.S. judiciary. So what sort of debate will that be?
That's a great question. I mean, you have to take a clear look at the FISA court, and a lot of the requests don't even go to FISA, especially real-time requests. And when they do go to FISA, they get approved within minutes. I mean, it's a matter of a rubber stamp. There's no oversight. You have to look at the head of the FBI. Robert Mueller himself comes from the Justice Department of the United States. Was very, very tight with most of the high-level folks who run the Justice Department. So for him to be scrutinized by his friends would be highly unlikely. It's my opinion that you have the fox watching the hen house. There is no oversight, there is no accountability, and it's really gone to the point where anything the government likes to do, the government is able to do without any accountability or recourse.
And of course, we're going to expand on that more. I'm just trying to build the stage here and ask you, I don't know if you saw the press conference that Obama had yesterday, but he said he would ask Congress to reform. This is one of the 4 things he said. He's going to reform one of the most controversial sections of the Patriot Act, Section 215. I'm guessing that not many Americans actually know what that really entails. Can you give us an idea of what Section 215 is and the reform that he suggested?
I cannot. No, I'm not very familiar with the Patriot Act from that perspective, but I can guarantee you that many activities that the Patriot Act was fabricated for was basically supporting really an administrative nightmare for the American people. This has been an ongoing nightmare since 9/11. They have instigated quite a bit amount of privacy violations, human right violations against the American people based upon the Patriot Act. This is an environment where any type of surveillance is allowed, any type of search and seizure is allowed based upon potential terrorism, and they've extremely overemphasized the amount of terrorism that we're dealing with. I mean, you have to take a look at the fact that most people are just responding to the fact that the Americans are continually attacking them. These kinds of legislation and these kinds of policies that the Americans have has really created the kind of response that they're getting. They're not out stopping terrorism, they're out creating terrorism. So you have a society that is being told to be wary of terrorism, when terrorism is not something that has just grown organically. Terrorism has grown because people are getting tired of being continuously attacked by the American military-industrial complex. And they are the ones that are writing the rules and the legislations for the American people. And the American people are just eating it up on the news and the misinformation that they're getting from their government.
Very well. Let's bring in Carol Gould into the conversation. Carol Gould, welcome. I'm going to start out with a general question. Is Obama being sincere when he talks about the fact that he's going to be more transparent and, of course, introduce oversight?
What I was going to say before, and I think Scott would be interested in this, is that I'm based in the United Kingdom. And what is so interesting is the complexity of the reaction to what Obama has been saying, the events of the past 2 weeks, because we also have Edward Snowden being given asylum in Russia, and this has caused a rift between Putin and Obama. Now, what I find interesting is that the major amount of surveillance and of what you might call paranoia in the U.S. happened after 9/11. And this is a period of time when John Ashcroft, the Attorney General, Condoleezza Rice, the head of National Security, Donald Rumsfeld, Defense Secretary, and Vice President Dick Cheney, as well as President Bush, were gung-ho about conducting massive, not spying, but that surveillance had to be increased, that the National Security Agency had to be wiretapping, listening to people's conversations, reading emails, and as Scott will recall, in the past 5 or 6 years, Americans have become more and more upset about this. The argument is here in the UK and in the US that it helps track down terrorists, and the people who argue in favor of this kind of surveillance are saying that Obama is actually doing a good job. He's perpetuating what the Bush administration did, which is they have to keep, quote, keep tabs on everyone. In order to sift out a needle in a haystack, you have surveillance over 30 million people. You might find one person who's about to commit a terrorist act. That is what the people who support this surveillance are saying. But what is interesting that has developed in the past few days is that there is also an element of thought which has been conveyed to me as a political commentator from other journalists, mostly on the right, on the extreme right, and who have been very much anti-Obama, that what he was doing in the past 3 years was the opposite of what Ashcroft and Bush and Condi Rice were doing, spying on the right. So listening to conversations by extreme right-wing groups, by the Tea Party groups, looking at their tax returns. So it's a very complex situation, and it has led now to this crisis where we've got Edward Snowden, who has been a whistleblower to some people. Jimmy Carter considers him a whistleblower, the former president, whereas the other percentage of Americans feel he's a hero. In Germany, 50% of people think he's a hero, 50% think he's a traitor. Angela Merkel has been saying the surveillance is a terrible thing, Francois Hollande in France, but it is an accepted fact that these countries have cooperated with the US and the UK on massive amounts of surveillance. So what Obama sounded like yesterday to me, Scott may disagree, he sounded like a lawyer being very careful about what he said, rather than showing leadership and saying, this is what we're going to, this is what I plan to do. He really was splitting hairs. So it wasn't a very satisfactory press conference.
And he did look on the edge, Scott Rickard. Again, I don't know if you saw that press conference, but I'm trying to break down some of the things, Scott Rickard, that he said he's going to do, and
yes,
some of the other reforms. He said an overhaul of well, not an overhaul, but he said starting a website that describes intelligence activities and appoint a board of outside experts who will look more closely at surveillance programs and issue a report by the end of the year. Some are saying, come on, Obama, you could do a little bit better than that, having these two as part of your efforts there and explaining how much surveillance is actually occurring. What was your reaction to some of these proposals that Obama says he's going to enact?
I assume that's for me, is that correct?
Yes, Scott Rickard.
I'm sorry. Definitely. I mean, the guy is really, you know, I cannot disagree with Carol. She's absolutely correct. You know, he was just being careful. He's tiptoeing, trying to not, you know, continually upset the status quo. Fact is that I really don't believe anything that this guy has to say any longer. It's been going on. You know, he certainly is the epitome of George Bush. The only difference is that he has a different education and a different background. But the fact is, his policies are very much the same. His disingenuous, misleading information that he feeds the American people is very much the same. We don't have clear leadership. We do have a lot of people that are dancing around the truth. And then around the truth, you know, the truth of the matter is that we do have a society that has been highly surveilled for some time now. You know, you had the Hoover guys, and you know, you had everybody involved in the 50s and 60s, just building up an entire infrastructure, collecting intelligence against the Americans. And the fact is that it's just gotten a lot more technological. You know, we are tracked everywhere we go. Everyone's carrying around their own personal recording devices. Everybody is locatable by GPS. Every purchase they make, if they're using any kind of credit card information, everything that they're purchasing is known. Things that they Google on Amazon are known. Everything where the websites that they visit are known. So it's a lot worse than it used to be, and the information is very easily attainable. And that's the kind of thing that Snowden is really making more of a revelation, where people like me have been talking about this for over a decade. But you know, we're considered tinfoil hat. And the fact is that now you've got somebody in a mainstream media who's saying things that are definitely making sense, and the technology does provide a much better capability to keep an eye on us, and the government's not being honest with us at the same time.
Exactly. And Carol Gould, the big question comes about, is that constitutional based on the U.S. Constitution?
Well, you know, you could say that every American has the right to the famous clause life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I'm not being flippant about this. This is a very serious topic we're on tonight, but Edward Snowden felt that he was pursuing life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in order to satisfy himself that he was revealing to the American people that there is too much surveillance, that we have reached an Orwellian state, which is not quite as bad as the Soviet system and the KGB and East Germany. It's not nearly as bad as that, but that in the world that Jimmy Carter lives in the universe he lives in, he feels that Edward Snowden was just conducting the right of an American of free speech and to talk about something that he felt was wrong in the workplace. Now, a devil's advocate would say, in the United Kingdom in the past year, the intelligence services have stopped 2 major terrorist attacks, one by what we call the fertilizer bombers, and the other were the young men in 2006 who came to trial this year, who were going to blow up an assortment of international airplanes with liquid bombs. And that was purely the work of the British intelligence services, possibly wiretaps. But by the same token, with all the surveillance that was going on for the past decades, the 2 bombings still happened in 1998 in Kenya and Tanzania. 9/11 happened. There have been bombs in Bali and in Spain and in Jordan and all over the world. And in the UK, we had 7/7 in 2005. And with all the massive intelligence, this thing slipped through the net. So as I have said many times, you could be spying on 50 million people. One person, perhaps a needle in a haystack, you catch them. But I think the way Americans feel is, many Americans, not all, is that they don't like the idea that they're, as Scott was saying, your Amazon purchases, your ATM purchases, the books you're buying, the CDs are being recorded somewhere by an organization like Booz Allen Hamilton, which is where Edward Snowden worked. And that's been around since 1914. This whole situation goes back, as Scott was saying, to the time of J. Edgar Hoover. It goes back to the 1920s and 30s. But they didn't have sophisticated technology. We're now in a world of advanced technology, as President Obama said yesterday. But the feeling, I would say, amongst 50% of Europeans, British people, and Americans is that it has to be curbed.
Well,
the other 50% say, great, let's carry on.
Scott Rickard, let me now say why Obama is not being sincere. I mean, in a matter of speaking, this is something picked up in an interview on PBS, the National Security Agency, this former official stated this in an interview. His name is Russell Tycho, I believe, and he said, when asked about NSA collecting everything, now he said, all content, word for word, everything, every domestic communication in the entire country is being picked up. And there was another gentleman in that interview, former NSA technical leader. He said there's a place called the Utah Data Center, codenamed Bumblehive, so big and wide in scope that you can store 100 years of the world's communication at this center. Why doesn't Obama, now the cat's out of the bag, tell America and the world how extensive this spying system, surveillance program, et cetera, is?
Definitely, there's a giant surveillance network going on. Out in Utah, they're building one of the largest storage facilities to store 100 years worth of communications. And every single phone call, every single email, every single transaction is being stored. Now, is it being monitored? No, but it's being stored so they can go back and they can look in case something happens, so they have historical data. Now, that, in my opinion, is definitely Orwellian. It's far beyond anything Nazi Germany or Stalin or Lenin could have ever imagined. It's to say that it's certainly it's a treasure trove of information for anyone who has access to it and uses it in any way that they deem legal. And that's where I think the real disingenuous portion with the American people lie, is that it's not legal. A lot of the things that they're doing with the information is very illegal. The activity that the Americans involved in, they've been illegal for decades. I've seen guys like Semyon Mogilevich who have laundered $6 billion through the Bank of New York with the CIA. The guys that I've worked with that have, we turned states' evidence against Iran-Contra back in the 80s that was just swept under the rug by the Department of Justice. So there is many things that happen illegally that are basically hidden from the American people as national security interests, and they have nothing to do with national security. All they're doing is hiding criminal activity, hiding war crimes, hiding drug crimes, hiding financial crimes by a myriad of people. It crosses every single party, every single country. It is horrific what the Americans and the British and the French and the other leaders of this world have done over the past 50 years.
And Carol Gould, since Scott Rickard mentioned a financial angle to this, why hasn't this worked in that regards? I mean, we're looking at the financial crisis that erupted back in 2007-8. And one analyst that I'm sure you're familiar with, Max Kaiser, he has called it financial terrorism. And we're looking, the U.S. is looking for terrorists. Well, gosh, they could have saved themselves so much money, not to mention their economy that they're still bleeding from. Why wasn't it applied there?
Well, I will tell you one thing. I'm supposed to get my state pension in the UK next month, but it's been postponed to 2018 because I've been told there's no money. But then we hear about the millions upon millions being spent on various programs by the UK government as well as the US government. On one hand, we're told technically the US is bankrupt. The UK is also in a tremendous financial crisis. Yes, you're right. I mean, a lot of money could be saved by not spying on everybody. The cliche, needle in a haystack, can be used here. You know, Israel has one of the greatest intelligence services in the world, but Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated walking down the steps at a peace rally. John F. Kennedy was assassinated. More recently, we've had all these terrorist attacks. So we can spy on millions of people, but I hate to say it, somebody with a gun can just walk up to someone and get the deed done that they want to do. Anwar Sadat was assassinated. Benazir Bhutto. So countries with the most fantastic intelligence services can't stop atrocities or attacks, except in the UK where we did stop the recent terrorist attacks. But it's an enormous amount of money being spent while Americans and British people and Europeans are being told that their countries have no money for social infrastructure.
And in conclusion, Scott Rickard, it seems like there is a concern for the Obama administration, including Obama, to have come out making these press statements. Do you think that there's going to be a backlash from average Americans regarding what is occurring if this news just keeps rolling and snowballing? And of course, we never know what's going to happen with Snowden and his revelations.
Well, I would hope so, but unfortunately, the Americans have shown themselves to be quite apathetic. It's most of the people that live in Western societies, because of the financial luxuries that they've been living under for so long, and it's really been a facade of financial success. Just as Carol described, her pensions are being withheld from her that she earned, rightfully so, for another half-decade now. She won't receive those. And what the root of the problem is, it's not the amount of money that's being spent on spying, because it's quite large, don't get me wrong. There's probably trillions of dollars been spent on it, no doubt. But at the same time, there's trillions of dollars being spent on an unnecessary military-industrial complex. There's the same things being spent on unnecessary financial, what I'll say, finagling. So what has to happen in order to solve these kinds of problems, you have to attack the root. And I've said this many times. The root of the problem is the financial markets that really control the militaries. And governments don't die. People do. And the governments will still be here when you and I are long gone. And they will continue to operate the way they're operating unless the people rise up like the Commonwealth Wars of the 1700s across Europe and the United States.
Thank you very much. We're going to end it there. Former American intelligence linguist talking there, Scott Rickard from Florida. And we had Carol Gould talking to us from London. She's an American author and a commentator. Thank you, the viewer, for watching another edition of The Debate. Any questions or comments, newsroom@presstv.r is our email address. From me, Kaveh in the team in the capital, Tehran, it's goodbye.
those leaks triggered a much more rapid and passionate response than would have been the case if I had simply appointed this review board to go through and I'd sat down with Congress and we had worked this thing through.
Yet at the same time, Obama has made it clear that Washington has no intention of ending its spying programs. The U.S. government claims it only collects data on individuals when investigating suspected terrorists. But the facts on the ground show otherwise. The case of a Texas teen who posted a sarcastic comment on Facebook while playing an online video game is just one example. Justin Carter is facing a felony charge for his inappropriate online joke and could face 8 years in prison. He has now been
Empire.
Weeks after the revelation of a mass U.S. spying program both inside the country and abroad, the U.S. president is trying to address the public's concerns. Speaking at a White House press conference, Obama admitted that his government's controversial surveillance activities, which involve the daily collection of millions of phone calls and emails, have depleted public trust.
It is absolutely true that with the expansion of technology, this is an area that's moving very quickly. With the revelations that have depleted public trust, that if there are some additional things that we can do to build trust back up, then we should do them.
To restore this trust, Obama says he will bring more oversight and transparency into U.S. spying activities in the wake of the revelations made by former NSA contractor Edward Snowden in June.
There's no doubt that Mr. Snowden
Released on bail. And so while Obama claims his administration has no interest in snooping on ordinary citizens, it seems the U.S. government will continue to analyze the communication patterns of everyone.
That's the key word, everyone. Let's find out if our guests agree or disagree. Former American intelligence linguist Scott Rickard joins us from Florida. We have American author and commentator Carol Gould joining us from London. I'd like to welcome both of our guests. Let me first start with you, Scott Rickard. How much of a hit has the Obama administration taken over this surveillance or spying program, and why is Obama worried?
Well, I wouldn't call it much of a hit. These kinds of revelations have been coming out for many years. I remember when I first started to discover these types of things in the early 80s, and I was working at the NSA. So James Bamford's book came out in 1983, and it was a book that we all found very interesting because we found out things that we didn't even know ourselves as we worked there, and they turned out to be absolutely true. That being said, whether or not he's taking a hit, I think that he's being extremely disingenuous with the American people. To say the fact that he was, he was going to put together some form of oversight before the Snowden incident is just complete. It's completely disingenuous. I mean, they would have never been a review board, and thankful for reporters like Glenn Greenwald, and he has good access to mainstream media. He's one of the few outspoken journalists that does continue to have good access to both BBC and American media. So no, Obama didn't really take a hit. This guy's been basically ducking and dodging the truth and misleading the American people for some time now.
Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm Kavitafa. U.S. President Barack Obama has announced a host of measures to strengthen oversight and transparency of the controversial surveillance program, aiming to ease public concerns and uneasiness. Is his promise sincere? Experts have said his promises would not include structural changes to the program. Well, in this debate, we're going to ask our experts the same, and additionally, dig deeper into U.S.'s vast surveillance